People walking in who said they were coming. Special thank you to Noam, Rabbi Noam Pratzer.
Noam is good. Yeah.
Okay, to Noam for he just arrived here from Israel last week, and he's going to be with us for 3 months, and has graciously offered to do this program. If you can silence your phone, that would be great. Noam's going to be speaking or engaging with us for the next hour. If you'd like anything to drink, please help yourself. And from here, I'll just say we have a week full of lots of events. Thursday night we have a challah bake. Friday night we have a hike, a scotch and salami before Shabbat. Friday night dinner, Karabach Kabbalat Shabbat. Saturday we have services. We have Tat Shabbat in the morning and Shabbat services and lunch, and then Havdalah. And then if you want to volunteer on Sunday, we are doing a project with the Federation. So I've sent it out all the details over email. If you would like to come to anything, please RSVP so I can send you all the location details. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Noam.
All right, thank you. First of all, thank you, Jody, for organizing. Before we start, I'll say just 2 or 3 words about myself, just for context. So like Jody said, my name is Noam. I'm from Toronto originally, grew up there. Been in Israel the last 10 years. Met my wife there, and we got married 5.5 years ago. Came here, like I said, to climb, ski, connect with the Jewish community here, see what's going on. The plan is to be here for 3 months. But that's it. So we're excited to join and be a part and see what's going on here, and thank you, Jody, for setting this up. So what I want to do over the next, we'll start, I think we set out for 4 weeks, and we'll see where it goes, what people are interested in, and take it from there. But I want to cover sort of different, very sort of basic questions about basic philosophy of Judaism and what this tradition is about, what this people is about. The recording? Yes, okay. Yes, we're recording. We were asked to record, so that's why the computer's open here. So I want to start, before I jump into anything, we're going to do, each week we'll cover sort of a different theme in terms of what Judaism is about, or different sort of paradigms or dichotomies. So this week what we're going to talk about is Judaism as an individualistic religion, or sort of religion about individual perfection, versus something that's community or society based, or based on some sort of broader vision for the world, comparing those. We'll talk other weeks hopefully about, is this sort of more of a rational philosophy, or is this a mystic vision? Are we a people, or are we a nation or a religion? Comparing sort of different big questions, and we'll use that as a springboard to hopefully bring a lot of different interesting sources and just get exposure to a wide variety of Jewish philosophy, from the Bible itself through to contemporary Jewish philosophy. That's the broad vision. And before we start and jump into today's topic, I thought we'd go around and very briefly with 2 or 3 sentences. One, you can introduce yourself. I'll try to remember, and one just to meet people. But if you can give 2 or 3 sentences after just you say hi and who you are, about what you think Judaism is about in a very succinct nutshell.
Oh, I'm first.
No pressure.
I'm Susan. I live in Mill Creek. I'm from Chicago originally. I grew up in Jewish youth groups, Young Judea, which is a Zionistic youth group. That's where I got my Jewish values. My family wasn't that, religious or anything like that, but I've always, I've always enjoyed the culture of it, and what do I think it is? It's hard to say what I think it is. I just, it's just part of my life and who I am as an identity.
Yeah.
I'm Renata. I grew up in Utah, and I didn't really have much kind of foundational introduction into Judaism. So my mother was Jewish, my family's Ukrainian, and so I grew up for a time under Mormon faith. So my sister grew up back in Maryland, where I was born, and was kind of served as my exposure to Judaism and the culture and religious beliefs. So now I'm kind of generally uninformed about a lot of it. So I've kind of been taking an approach as an adult to reclaim it for myself, to discover what it is. To me personally, for my kind of sentimentality towards it, I think I've really leaned into sort of a more mystic involvement with it, something that's more spiritual and something that I'm intrigued in getting involved with more, whether it be community values. So yeah, understanding it more personally and societally than biblically.
Great, thank you.
I'm Len Steckel. I live here. I grew up in New York, in the Bronx. My first language was Yiddish. I didn't speak English till I was 3. I lived with my grandparents who never spoke English. My parents worked, and I was with my grandmother all day long, so that was my exposure. I grew up Orthodox, very conservative, moved to Reform, so I've covered the whole spectrum.
Covered the bases.
It's a very hard question to answer. I don't know how to answer it.
It's not a fair question, I'll say that.
Right?
You know, being Jewish has always been who I am, part of my identity. It's always been incredibly important to me. And I can't tell you why, but it's the sense of community, it's a sense of helping others, it's a sense of just being a good person. That's how I would define it. And I think that's part of the Jewish religion and part of what I took away from my upbringing. I was bar mitzvah. And it was important to me to marry somebody Jewish, which I did.
Oh, just wait, yeah. So I grew up in New York in a Jewish household that didn't know anything about Judaism, so it was just name only.
Sure. Sorry, we asked to record, just fixing that. There we go. All right. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I didn't know anything till we had kids. So I married him and his mother called me the shiksa. So I was Jewish by birth, that's it. And he'll have a lot of funny jokes about my, So Judaism to me is the only religion there is. I mean, that's how I feel. I'm not religious. I learned a lot in my kids' preschool and on through all my kids' education. I learned most during the bar mitzvah weekend with my oldest son when you go away and kind of reveal like a lot, and it was just really kind of an eye-opening experience to then have my first kid as a bar mitzvah. It was just amazing, and then we ended up in Israel with him, and we're very close to Israel in our heart. So that's it.
Yeah, thank you.
June will be back in a minute, so I'll let her introduce herself when she comes. But what was the specific question?
The specific question, which I acknowledge is a very unfair question, but if you can, how you would define Judaism in a nutshell?
How you
think it is?
define Judaism?
In a nutshell, yeah, in 2 or 3 sentences, what it is.
I would say to define Judaism or my Judaism.
You can take it wherever you want.
Okay,
to take
I'll
it.
say Judaism for me is my culture, my heritage, and kind of like what Karen said. Right, it's like all I know. And so, wow, that's a really tough question. I could maybe better describe what my Judaism is, but
No, that's fair.
it's our culture, it's our heritage. I just said that, and
Seems like what everyone else did, so just go.
okay, I'm going with it. I'm going to turn it over to Doug.
Because that was my plan. I didn't know the question. I was just listening to what everybody else was saying and inferred the question. So my plan is to
Yeah, the question was just a brief intro and like just who your name and who where you're from, and then a 2 or 3 sentence summary, if you want, of what you think Judaism is. How you
we're
define
Jews,
it.
so we don't do 2, 3 sentences.
Well, I know we're gonna try. We're gonna try.
Hi, I'm Doug.
Hey.
A set of rules by God on how to live your life and interact with everybody culturally and religiously that are unchangeable as well.
Okay. All right. We've got that was very, very succinct.
Wow.
Nice.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well played.
But
On the
June,
spot.
right?
You let me.
Did you want to jump in? Say just introduce yourself and then say in a sentence or 2 what you think Judaism is, if you want to answer that.
Okay, sure. I'm June Feigelman.
Hi, June.
Hi, June.
What's Judaism? Well, it's well, holidays and celebrating, a culture that is stemming from the Ten Commandments. That's what basically it is, and belief in God. That waking up every day is a blessing.
Right. All right. It's like a sort of stance of gratitude towards life.
Yeah.
Right.
And then a meal.
Always. And I can get your name, but so maybe.
Yeah,
maybe
sorry for the
last.
slight tardiness. This was
All good.
Jordan, BGO. So I'll kind of give a more long-winded because I'm a little bit insecure about what my Judaism means to me, and that's kind of how everyone was answering when I got here. So I'm just gonna roll with it. A lot of probably my experience with Judaism is a little circumstantial. Well, of course, everyone's is really, but my dad is Jewish by birth. My mom was not Jewish by birth. My mom had an Orthodox conversion. Was interested in. She was interested in other religions, and she was exploring other religions in college, and kind of like was taking religion classes and met my dad, and so she was already kind of interested in not being Christian. She wasn't super into the intensity of it, I guess.
What type of Christian was she?
That's a great question.
Okay, sorry to interrupt.
I don't know what sect.
Okay.
I have to ask my aunt. It's a good question. I'll get back to you in 2 weeks or whenever the next meeting is. She had kind of at the same time as exploring religion meets my dad and was already interested in Judaism. Had an Orthodox conversion. They get married. I'm born and the first 5 years were in Houston, and the next 13 until I went to college were in Northeast Tennessee. So I grew up in a conservative synagogue, but that's because it's the only synagogue between like anywhere near where I lived. It was 35 minutes away in a small little town called Bluntville, and we had a congregation of maybe 40 to 70 people, but only like a handful showed up at any given time. We always had rental rabbis. Everyone from Southwest Virginia, Northeast Tennessee came there. If you lived east of Knoxville by 45, 50 minutes, you would probably go into that synagogue.
Incredible.
I would say we kind of were more active in Sunday school than maybe Friday night services and stuff, because my mom wanted me to have a social life. And in my high school of 1,200, 1,600 people, there was only 3-4 Jewish people. So I'm kind of insecure about my Judaism because I don't have a solid foundation of the culture of it, and we would go to high holidays, and then I would go to, I think 2 years prior to my bar mitzvah, I would go to services every other week. And then the year of my bar mitzvah, they made me go to services every Friday night. Almost never went to Saturday services. But I think I did a few times during the bar mitzvah year to get the melody of the Haftorah down and stuff like that. Was bar mitzvahed, and then just kind of it became periphery only high holidays. And so, other people who maybe grew up in Cleveland or New York or wherever, bigger communities, even Knoxville probably, like, you just have more friends who are Jewish, you go to more things, you celebrate more holidays, you know what to say on holidays, and I know fuck all about that. I always forget, and so I think I'm trying to reconnect a little bit.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. So that's, I think, the answers we got. I've actually very pleasantly. It's good. The answers. No one. I think very few. Doug did a bit, but most people didn't try to define what Judaism is, and talk more about sort of the emotional, cultural upbringing relationship. And I'll start with saying, like I said, this was not a fair question to start. And I would almost give like a word of caution. I think people will say, or if you read articles, wherever you get your Jewish education or content from, whenever you hear whenever you hear a definition that is super succinct, or if someone says Judaism says, so whether Judaism says something about government, whether it's government, abortion, the existence of God, anything, right? The afterlife, almost anything someone says, you can probably find, if you look around a little, a position within the canon that says the exact opposite. Our tradition has, go ahead, Doug.
2 Jews, 3 opinions.
Exactly, and that's within, even within our canon, within the Bible itself, within the Tanakh, within the Talmud, within what's sort of the hallowed corpus of religious philosophy, where no one would say that they're outside of the box. Even within that sort of canonical tradition, you can find every position and its opposite. So the question that sort of is the baseline of this sort of series of classes is unanswerable, and there is no definition that you're going to get. But what I hope we'll be able to do over the next 4 weeks is to dive in a way that, one, assumes no prior knowledge, and so you can come from however much or little background you have, but dive into a variety of sources that show sort of the beauty of the diversity of voices within our tradition. And one, you'll find the ones that you relate to more or less, and you'll find the ones that you think are better or worse arguments, right? More or less compelling. And hopefully we can use that as a spur to conversation here, and a sort of a spark or spur for each of you to find, figure out what you think things mean. So with that sort of as the background, like I said, we're going to start each week. We'll sort of do a different dichotomy, or sort of show, different, different contrast of ideas. So this week, what I want to focus on is a contrast of Judaism specifically, religion in general, as something that's about the self, about the perfection of the individual, versus something that's really outward focused, as the sort of perfection of society. And so what we'll do is we're going to look at a variety of sources just to sort of see the way that these different ideals have been expressed. We'll start with looking at a few different sources. So if people have these booklets, a few different sources. The first half of this class, we'll talk about sources that talk about Judaism or religion really as about the individual. Also, if I use language, say something, reference something that I'll try to not assume anything. But if I do make any assumptions, please jump in. If something doesn't make sense, if I say a word that doesn't make sense, you don't know, please please don't be shy. And again, I'll try not to make any assumptions. So the first source we're going to look at is two sources from Maimonides. Maimonides, known in Hebrew as Rambam, is probably the most prolific Jewish thinker, rabbi, writer of the last 2,000 years, definitely since the times of the Talmud, so maybe even I'll step back in a very brief context in terms of 3 layers of texts that we'll talk about. One is the Bible itself. Bible, in Hebrew, the Tanakh, which is an acronym for Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, basically 5 books of Moses, the books of the prophets, and then the sort of later writings. That's sort of the earliest, let's call that the earliest part of the Jewish canon. Level after that we'll call the rabbinic. The Talmud is sort of the word you'll hear most. Talmud is composed of 2 portions, the Mishnah and the Gemara. It's just an earlier and later portion, but basically call that from around 600 BC until, let's say, until around 600 CE, around. So about 1,000 years, 1,200 years, right, depending on when you define the beginning and end of that. And then the period after that, and those two, so the Bible, the Tanakh, is sort of extremely canonized. The Talmud is pretty canonized. After that, you start getting more, so from, let's say, the year 600 or 700 until now, you'll get more debates about what's sort of legitimate within the canon, what's outside. Is Moses Mendelssohn, a Jewish philosopher, not a Spinoza, in the canon or out? So there's all these people who, some people will say, oh, they're heretics and they're out. Some will say they're in. Those are sort of the 3 levels historically of text that we'll talk about. So the Bible, the Talmud, the rabbinic period / and then the later period. So the more, we'll call it up until the modern period.
What do you mean by canonized?
When I say canonized, I mean sort of, and so I grew up in a modern Orthodox home, and that's if I had to sort of define myself, I'd define myself as kind of liberal Orthodox, I guess, if I have to sort of shoebox it. So when I say canon, and that's relevant to say canonized, I would say things that are universally accepted as sort of authoritative within the tradition. So the text of the Bible, for example, is pretty canonized. I mean, which books are included, what the text says, that's from Orthodox to Reform across the board, the books look pretty much the same. Maybe the translations are different on the margins, the genders, whatever, but it's pretty much the same. The Talmud also.
I only know the 5 books. You mentioned some other stuff in the
So-
Torah.
Yeah, so the Bible I would divide into 3. The Torah is sort of the 5 books of Moses. That's the earliest portion of that. After that, there's the prophets, which is, I couldn't tell you offhand the number of books, but let's say it's about around 12 books that have the post. So if the 5 books of Moses end with sort of Moses, the people about to enter the Promised Land, about to enter Israel, and Moses dying on the hill. The next section of the Tanakh, which is the prophets, are the stories of the Jews trying to build the Commonwealth in the state in Canaan at that point. And then there's a third portion called the Ketuvim, the writings, which include like the books that are read on the holidays, the books that are read on Purim, the Psalms, like a series of sort of later writings, some more wisdom literature.
The Megillah.
There's 5 Megillot. The 5 Megillas are all in that sort of third section, the writings. Yeah. So I would say the Bible, the 5 books, and those 2 other sections, the prophets and the writings, and the Talmud are all canonical in terms of across the Jewish spectrum. Everyone would say these are sort of the formative, authoritative books that sort of set out the Jewish tradition. After that, you'll get differences, right? So if the books of Abraham Geiger, who was an important philosopher of reform in sort of Germany in the 19th century, might be a canonical figure in the Reform movement, and the Orthodox movement might reject him, right? For example, Spinoza, some people might say was an important Jewish thinker. At his time, he was excommunicated from the Jewish community in Amsterdam in the 1600s, right? So you'll have people who are, so is Spinoza a legitimate source to look at, but he has a lot of biblical interpretation. Is he a legitimate Jewish source or not? Depends who you ask. When I say canonical, I would say everyone kind of agrees that they're like legitimate Jewish sources. That's sort of the Bible and the Talmud. Does that, okay. All right, so going back to what we're talking about, we're going to start now with the first set of sources about Judaism really as an individualistic religion, a religion focused on individual perfection. Here, all the sources we're going to look at are people from that third category, from post-Talmud. So the Rambam, Maimonides lives mostly in the second half of the 12th century in Spain, and then eventually he's kicked out of Spain, is in Morocco and Egypt. And so I was saying about him, he's probably, since the time of the Talmud, he is the most canonical person in our tradition, meaning the most broadly accepted, most prolific in terms of the amount he wrote, in terms of philosophy and halakha. Halakha means Jewish law. So sort of the most prolific sort of giant of our tradition in the last 1,000 years, probably. And is also read outside, his philosophy at least is read in, not hugely, but is read in secular philosophical world as one of the important religious philosophers of the Middle Ages. So we're going to start by reading a portion from the very end of his philosophical treatise, which is called The Guide for the Perplexed. It's a series of letters he wrote to one of his students. And here he sets out 4, I'm going to kind of read this quickly and then summarize it because it's long-winded a bit. So he talks about 4 kinds of perfection that you can achieve. He says, man can acquire 4 kinds of perfection. The first kind, the lowest, in the acquisition of which people spend their days, where we spend most of our time, is perfection as regards property, basically accumulating wealth. And he says there's no close connection between this possession and its possessor. So this isn't an important one, not because he's looking down on property, but because it's not intrinsic, right? If all your money disappears, you're still you. So if you're talking about perfecting the self, arguably it's too distant from you, right? It's not a value judgment. It's just too distant from you to be an important sort of primary perfection. The second kind is more closely related to man's body than the first, right, than money. It includes perfection of the shape, constitution, and form of man's body. Literally, right, call it physical fitness, right, physical perfection of the self. That's obviously physically closer to you than money. But he says this kind of perfection must likewise be excluded from forming our chief aim, right? It's also not our priority. Because it's a perfection of the body, and man does not possess it as man, but as a living being, he has this in common with the lowest animal. Basically, it's not uniquely human, right? The most impressive human specimen is pathetic compared to most animals on a fit, right? Like a hippo can run faster than Usain Bolt could run, right? So we, as far as physical perfections go, that's obviously not our calling. As far as perfections go, physical perfection is obviously not the human calling in terms of where we achieve our uniqueness. The third kind of perfection is more closely connected with man himself. It includes moral perfection, excellency, and character. Most of the precepts, meaning most of the mitzvot, which mitzvot are the sort of the religious commandments, right? Most of our tradition aims at producing this perfection. So most of the Jewish ritual, Jewish tradition, aims at perfecting us morally. But even this is only a preparation for another. Perfection is not sought for its own sake. He goes on to say, right, if you found yourself alone in the desert, there'd be no one to be moral to. And so if this is perfection, he's saying that's obviously, this isn't the ideal perfection, because it's still only contextual. Only when you're surrounded by people, you have to be moral. When you're alone, what makes you perfect in a vacuum? Again, you could criticize this. We're not, like, we can go into...
We're not going to.
Yeah, there's lots to criticize about this. Rambam is an extreme thinker. So I'll put that out there. The fourth kind of perfection is the true perfection of man, the possession of the highest intellectual faculties, the possession of such notions which lead to true metaphysical opinions as regards God. Maimonides, the Rambam isn't Aristotelian. It's important to know he is heavily influenced by certain medieval interpretations of the philosophy of Aristotle from ancient Greece. He is very much a rationalist philosopher. And so even in his interpretation of religion, his mindset is deeply philosophical, deeply rationalist. And for him, the perfection of humans, what humans have separate from all other beings, what we contain, even if we're not surrounded by anyone, is our mind. And all of the Jewish tradition, for him, is targeted towards proper intellectual apprehension of God. Very distant, probably, from a lot of the answers that we gave and that most of us might identify with as normal religious practice.
Archetypal.
Yeah, it's an archetype, but this is what it's all about, he's saying.
Yeah, I'm saying Aristotle's influence. The
Right.
archetype,
Right. Yes. Yeah, exactly. And so then he goes on. The next source I want to read is in his commentary to the Mishnah. So the Mishnah is, we talked about the Talmud, that sort of rabbinic canon after the Bible. The Talmud is divided into two portions. The Mishnah is just the earlier portion. The Gemara is the later portion, which is interpretation of that earlier portion. Not important, just giving it as context once for reading, not relevant here. So here he asked that, okay, if really that's really the whole point of life, or the whole point of our tradition and of life, and the reality is 99.999% of the world is, one, not going to get there, not going to focus our time on that, like it's just not really a realistic goal. Why did God create any of it? Like, what's the point of all, like, why isn't there just like one really, really smart human around and like nothing else, right? If that's really the goal, what's the point? Why would God have created this all? It doesn't make sense. And the answer he gives, which is very, in my opinion, uninspiring, right? But we're bringing extreme positions here to sort of get people, to sort of as springboard to think. So if we skip down to the line that starts in the middle, it's about 6 lines down, starts the answer.
Extreme opinions being like we can have extreme, or his.
His opinion is extreme.
I was gonna say each week, then you're gonna kind of do maybe kind of an outlier or like a +2 standard deviations of the mean kind of like think.
Not only, but sometimes often philosophers are extreme. So when you start getting into religious philosophy, they often can be the positions that come up often are extreme. The second half of the positions we see here actually will be not extreme, but some of the greatest thinkers are, I think, by nature, like geniuses can be extreme, and they take things to their logical conclusion, which often we use common sense to kind of mitigate, perhaps, so we don't get to sort of crazy extremes. But yeah, I'm not like as an ideology going to only bring extreme opinions, but a lot of interesting thinkers are.
It's good fodder for discussion. I gather is your point.
Yeah. So the answer to this line that starts the answer about 6 lines down. So why, if the whole point is this sort of intellectual perfection that most of us aren't going to get to, why do we have everything around? Why is the rest of the world created? The answer to this is these people, meaning everyone else except for maybe him and most, except for 1 or 2 people, came into existence for 2 reasons. The first is that they serve that one that is wise, not serve as like a servant, but since man is lacking, would need many things, he would have to study plowing, reaping, to thresh and grind, to bake. He would have to perfect these crafts. Basically, right, if I wanted to sit in this like pleasant room and drink something nice and contemplate God, I need someone to build this. I need someone to harvest crops to make food. We need someone to create glass for the bottles. Like all of the things that go into creating the conditions around which this one man or this 2 man or woman can sort of achieve perfection. Everything else, we need all sorts of humans to do all sorts of other industrious things so that one person can sit sort of and concentrate on this most important thing. Right? It's not necessarily an inspiring answer for the rest of us, right? All of us are kind of, ancillary to the one most important, but that's his answer. And then he says the other reason is that he's not lonely. So those people need me.
What was the question?
the question is if the goal of religious life. So we want that, right? Stepping back. The question that we're sort of using for today is, what is the purpose of Judaism? What's Judaism about? So answer one by Maimonides given is, Judaism is a system that puts into place the conditions to enable you to get to perfect intellectual apprehension of God. And that's the goal of the tradition. Again, maybe not not an inspiring goal to me, right? I'm not trying to say like, hey, I want to lay out a variety of ideas. So here's one from one of our most important thinkers, right, of our tradition. And if that's the case, if that's the goal, like realistically, most of us aren't going to get there. Most of us, like, he says there's one or two people in a generation who have that ability. Okay, well then why did you create a world of billions of people and, nature and stuff? Like, what do we need all this stuff around? And basically, because everyone else is there to create the conditions. We need people to work in government so that there's not violence, so that the one person who's going to get to the perfection isn't worried about being killed everywhere he goes. So we need government, and we need police, and we need food, and we need consumer packaged goods, and we need supermarket. But it's all about this one or two people. Again, this is not an inspiring, perhaps, position, but this is, if religion is about the individual and creating this individual perfection and pushing you to be the most ideal you can be, what is that ideal? So one ideal, he raises a few options: moral perfection, wealth, perfection of the body, and he says it's about intellectual perfection. I want to move on.
And this is this guy's answer.
This is Maimonides' answer. Yeah, it doesn't bind anyone. Yes, yeah.
Why does he have two different names, Rambam and Maimonides?
Maimonides is the Latin. Maimonides just means son of Maimon. Rambam is an acronym for Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, which means Rabbi Moses, the son of Maimon. So they're actually the same thing. It's just an anglicized version of the Latin and a Hebrew acronym that mean the same thing.
So
I'm just looking at my phone for the time, so I watched the
So introduction to the commentary to the Mishnah being the first portion of the Talmud. But where does he say that the 0.1 or 0.01% are going to achieve this intellectualness? Like, maybe it's just +2 standard deviations or whatever.
So he says, if we go to the next page, and we'll move on at the right up the last sort of 3 dots, so about 5 lines up from the bottom. He says the whole world was only created to join with this one person, like this one. And then he says his reasons. So,
I mean, it sounds like that person is like God or something, like if there's only one in the world, unless
the Messiah.
their world, is just smaller, and
that it's just, I mean, yes, it's very focused. I don't think it doesn't. I think there's still a large distance between that and God. It's very undemocratic. It's not the way of the world that we're used to thinking about, for sure. And it's not one that speaks to me, right?
Not
he
to
is
be
an
too
elitist.
nerdy, but there's more Jedi than there are like people that can attain.
Does he consider himself that one person?
That's an open question. There are some who would see him as thinking very highly of himself. There's debates as to whether he thought he had prophecy, but even for him, prophecy wasn't something that. The part that is democratic about this is he doesn't say like, oh, most people are born with no abilities and only a few people can get there. He says this is a tremendous discipline. There's a choice here. Most of us spend most of our time.
But that's only while we're alive.
Sorry?
What about when we die? You can still achieve in Judaism. In fact, you're supposed.
So his position on the afterlife.
Go ahead.
Is your scope of, and it's not a mystical position. It's based on like Aristotelian philosophy that is largely, I don't say debunked, but it's not what most people would consider. Back then, someone secular, if that existed, sort of this philosophy was predominant. Now it's not. But basically, the extent to which you activated your intellect actually connected you to some sort of, call it a god or something else, some sort of metaphysical state. And when your body then disintegrated, that intellect remained. So the more you advanced your intellect during life, that actually dictated your afterlife. If you sat around and didn't advance it at all, there's no afterlife left for you. It's naturalist, actually, because it's just the more effort you put in, you get there or not. I want to move on from Maimonides. You can talk about Maimonides forever,
Jewish
but I want to.
If you could be brief on. Well, I don't mean if you can be brief as some sort of commentary on you, but more like I don't want to take. I don't want to be the cause of a tangent. So
Yeah,
but
I can
like
do
again, my knowledge of Judaism is not prodigious, and so my what I've sort of been explained from my parents or whatever was that there's really no conception of a heaven or hell in Judaism. There's not a hell to stay away from or a heaven to go to. You don't, say Hail Marys to absolve yourself of sins, yada yada. What is the Jewish canon of the afterlife, actually?
Okay. So I'll give a brief answer, and then, like I said, whenever someone says, "What does Judaism say?" there's always a plurality of voices that say different things. The Bible is almost entirely silent on afterlife and does not seem interested in. It doesn't deny it. It doesn't seem. It's just not discussed. The Talmud already seems to presume there is something called Olam Haba, which means literally the world to come, which seems to arguably be some sort of afterlife. And there's definitely a messianism. Messianism is an end of days historically. It's in this world. Whether there seems to be a position in the rabbis.
Messianism, not messiness.
Like Messiah. Like there's a Messiah. There's a messianic era. There's an era within this world that will be a utopia when the Messiah comes, whatever that is. And the rabbis seem to assume that there will be some sort of resurrection of the dead in that case, the rabbis of the Talmud. But again, the Bible itself is largely silent on that. So the predominant Orthodox opinion would say there's a world to come and there's a resurrection, there's an afterlife. Maimonides was attacked as not believing in resurrection, and he kind of said, no, I believe in it, but whether he really did or not, who knows? So the standard answer, if you asked a standard Orthodox rabbi, the answer would be there's an afterlife and there's a world to come, and there's an afterlife and there's a resurrection of the dead as well. The Bible is eerily silent on that, and I'll leave it at that. I don't want to go further into that for now. Okay, I want to read two more sources quickly about, and maybe in the interest of time. Sorry, my watch is on the wrong time. Okay, in the interest of time, we're not going to read them inside. But two more sources that talk about Judaism as geared towards individual perfection. One is the Shlomo of Isaiah Horowitz, who was a rabbi in the 1600s, an important influential mystic. He basically says the goal of the Jewish tradition is to cleave to God through imitating Him. Our tradition has lots of texts about imitating God. Just as God is merciful, so you shall be merciful. As God is just, you shall be just, etc. So these good attributes of God. The idea is you imitate them. Through that, you find a way of cleaving to God, and that is the ultimate perfection. Is this sort of cleaving is the Hebrew word is tvekut, and it's a word that's used a lot in the mystical tradition. But it's some sort of binding yourself to God through imitating Him, and that's the goal. The Ramchal, another sort of important mystic from the 18th century, from the 1700s, the goal of the Jewish tradition, the goal of the entire goal of life and of the Jewish canon is to get you to a place where you can bask in the divine glory. You can bask in what's called the Ziv HaShechina, which literally means the radiance or the splendor of the divine presence. So there's some sort of basking in this sort of euphoria, in sort of this joy in the divine light. All of these, and maybe in other weeks we'll get more into some of the actual details of these approaches, but the idea here was to share. There's a variety of goals where you can say this tradition is about, and its real goal, if you dedicate day and night to it, is about getting you to some form of perfection, some form of spiritual bliss. That can be intellectual, moral, spiritual, euphoria. I asked ChatGPT to summarize samsara and nirvana, so two important concepts in the Buddhist tradition, right? That samsara is the world is basically endless cycles of suffering. We have sort of rebirths within the world of suffering. And if you achieve nirvana, you achieve this sort of state of liberation through meditation. I'm not an expert on Buddhism. I've read a book or two and that's it. But the idea is, right, a different religious tradition that says the world is filled with suffering. You, through meditation and devotion, you can bring yourself to escape from that and achieve a state of bliss. Again, all of these are about religious traditions that are giving you that are paths towards some sort of perfection, bliss, spiritual attainment. but individualistic, very importantly. That's sort of group one of what Judaism's about or what a religious tradition is about.
But the last two that you just spoke about, everybody can achieve that. Whereas Maimonides, only basically there's one person that can.
I don't think Maimonides might say that everyone can achieve it, but there's just there's just normal distributions in life, right? Anyone could be an unbelievable rock climber or skier. Not maybe some people, let's say there's a range, right? Everyone could climb, I don't know if anyone's a climber, everyone could climb up to grade X. Everyone could climb a 513 or easy 514 if you spend your life dedicated to it.
That's just not true.
Or whatever that number is, right? Or everyone could run a 5-minute mile.
Yeah.
Whatever, but we just know the reality is most people are not going to dedicate the amount of time it takes to be great at that one thing. So there's just a normal, so it could be that everyone can achieve it. It's just normal distribution in the way of the world.
So, in the Orthodox tradition, when all those guys go studying and that's it, and they're supported by family and community because all they do is study, is that them?
So the irony, this is a whole different conversation. I want to make sure we have time for the other half. That movement where the majority, so first of all, most of what that time is spent studying is Talmud. Talmud is largely halachic, meaning it's largely legalistic. And most of the content they're studying is actually what you'd call, so I'm a lawyer, that's like my day job, what you'd call private law, right? Is mostly studying torts and contracts, largely torts, to be honest.
The Talmud is
That's what
Jewish
the Orthodox is studying?
Mostly is Jewish law of torts. Not, again, I may be exaggerating, there's other, but it's mostly legalistic. A large portion of it, there's Jewish laws of torts, Jewish laws of marriage, there's other portions. But a lot of it,
the Talmud.
The Talmud covers a wide variety. In those yeshivas where there tend to be specific parts of the Talmud that are focused on. It's not only torts. I'm exaggerating, so I should. There's other parts.
Tort? I forget.
Tort is based if someone injures someone. It's if you sue someone for like personal injury, that's torts. If arson, like sort of personal property damage kind of law.
But not contract. Like
And
contract.
Contract.
then
Tort
yeshiva
is like
is a
grievous.
university, but then when you mentioned yeshiva, what context are you using?
So yeshiva. So I'm sorry. Remind me your name.
Karen.
So Karen asked when sort of people are going and studying all day, like what is it? There's like how does that relate to this? So a yeshiva is basically a Jewish place of study that traditionally is only men. In sort of Orthodox circles, traditionally was only men, and traditionally focuses most of the study time on Talmud, which are debates of Jewish law, and they're not even usually studying to get down to like finally what the law is in the end of the day. They're actually studying the text of the debates from 2,000 years ago. There is a whole theological development approach as to why that's important.
Jewish laws, it's literally torts.
Yeah, it's torts. It's also laws about other things, laws about divorce, laws, etc. But yeah, they'll be reading one, and again, because it comes from older times, they'll be reading, an ox went into a store, knocked over a candle, and caused a fire. Who's liable? Well, where was the candle placed? This is people who spend days and months on this.
That's the Talmud.
Yeah, the Talmud will also say on Shabbat.
That would be one anecdote of what is discussed.
Yes,
in the Talmud.
the Talmud is a massive text.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
But that is literally
Yeah.
that is an example
Yes.
of something that's discussed in the. Okay.
Right, yeah. So but to come back here, most of it is not spent on studying apprehension of God or mystic. There are maybe small places where they're focused on like real mystical study, but most of it is not that. And there's theologies that justify that this is God's will, and through studying this, you're bringing down divine light. But yeah, it would be the things they'd be talking about are very technical and mundane, and not these kind of lofty goals. Then, if you ask the philosopher of that, what is the goal of all this? Then they might say, well, this really gets you to understand God's will, understand something, but it would be very distant from what they're actually talking about in the moment. Okay, I want to move on because it's 10 to 8. So the second half I want to talk about is Judaism as really much more of a collectivist tradition, and is really not focused on individual perfection, but focused on the perfection of society. And to do that, I want to start by actually looking at the Bible, the 5 books. And we'll start as a starting point. So I brought sort of a few quotes, sort of running through from the beginning of the Bible. The Bible starts near the beginning, right in the first chapter. God creates man in the divine image. God blesses them, says to them, right, what does God tell man to do? Why did he put him on earth? He says, be fertile and increase, fill the earth, master it, rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and the living things. Basically, go out and conquer the world, build civilization.
We did that.
So we'll read a few. Yes, maybe too much. God settled the human in the Garden of Eden. He said, till it and tend it. Put him in the Garden of Eden. Didn't say sit and meditate and contemplate. Said go take care of this garden. Right, take care of this. And then, a certain point, a few generations later, God saw man was being really wicked. Got upset. He regretted making mankind. He destroyed it all. Right, that's the flood of Noah. And then he starts again. And he starts again. There's a few stories in between, but he comes to Abraham in chapter 12. This is in last week's Torah portion, a week and a half ago. God says to Abraham, go forth from your native land, from your father's house, to the land that I'll show you. And this is the first interaction. This is arguably the beginning of the Jewish people, right? When God sort of singles out an individual. He says, I'm going to make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. You will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you and curse the ones who curse you, and all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. So if we want to take a mission statement of the Jewish people from sort of its origin point, arguably here, it has nothing to do with contemplation of the divine, nothing to do with mystical meditation. It's go out and be a source of blessing to the world. Now, how do you do that? Maybe there's a lot of questions, but the point is to be a source of blessing, right? To make the world a blessed place.
This is Abraham or Abram?
His name was, God changed his name. His name was Abram originally, and then God changes his name. He adds H-A.
That's why I say, well, no soliloquy from me this time, but just that's one of the things that, because I'm not the most religious person, I actually probably, this might be controversial, but if you look at the history of religion, polytheism to monotheism, it kind of does seem like an opiate to the masses kind of thing, but what I like about Judaism is that my parents were kind of like, oh, well, if you don't go to heaven or hell in Judaism, then what's the point? It's like to leave the world a better place, which is referenced here, which reminded me, I forgot to kind of mention that earlier, but that's what's kind of kept me as a not very religious person, like very grasped to the concept of being Jewish and liking of being Jewish, even if I feel disconnected to it and unreligious and unknowledgeable of it and various other things. It's like, yes, but I want it to be I don't want to be atheist.
Right.
I want it to be my religion because it's not intense. It's just leaves the world a better place kind of thing.
Right. So I think that's in this second half. There's a very strong read of the Bible and of later Jewish philosophy, is saying the goal of the Jewish tradition is to improve. I think the words tikkun olam, which means rectification of the world, have been kind of dumbed down. It's like watered down, and it sort of is used to sort of for anything. So
what does it mean?
Tikkun olam literally means fixing the world. But I think in certain ways, and I don't want to talk at all about politics, in certain ways it's been used in the sort of liberal Jewish community as making Judaism equivalent to progressive politics. You can be Jewish and progressive or Jewish and conservative, it doesn't matter. That's not the point here, but I think that word has become, within the Jewish community, become associated with a very specific portion of the community and a very specific politics. It doesn't have to be. The concept of the Jewish tradition as being a tool to make the world, to improve the world, to impart blessing to the world is the sort of alternative to it being a thing that's focused on perfecting the individual and creating a spiritual or intellectual perfection.
To bolster that point, why did we reject Jesus Christ as the Messiah? And what will our Messiah do? Lay down your arms, speak to all the nations.
Yeah.
Bring them all, well, criticize them, but bring them all together.
Right.
I think I was trying to bolster your
Yeah.
point, but
No, our messianic vision, the messianic vision of the prophets, the vision of the end of days, the Messiah is, right, beat the swords into plowshares, right? There is no more war. That vision of a perfect end of days, whether you think it's like a Messiah is going to come from above or it's something that we slowly work towards in a much more rationalist way, that's a vision of the Jewish tradition, is saying we are targeting changing the world. We are targeting making the world better.
End of days is the concept. Conceptually, end of days is not Armageddon / end of the world, but end of the world with wickedness in it and beginning of a world with utopia. You mentioned utopia earlier.
I think that's a very good way of putting it.
Okay.
Yes.
So there's other organizations
You're
out
getting
there
more than you think you're getting.
that
Sorry?
there are
I'm
other
smart.
organizations
I'm
out
just
there.
unknowledgeable about
He's
Judaism.
actually
They're not
plant
necessarily
from
Jewish
the Jewish
organizations or even religious organizations,
conspiracy.
but their mission is to, bring positivity and light into the world and make the world
For
a
sure.
better place.
For sure.
as
So
well.
so we can step back and say, and this is a separate question, maybe we'll talk about it another week, because I do want to go through the rest of these, but like quickly, but you can, there's lots of ways to make the, if saying just, oh, the goal is to make the world a better place is very fluffy and generic and unspecific. And there's lots of ways to do that without a Jewish tradition. I think there's a read of specifically of the Bible that has a very specific position. One, you can say God has different covenants with different peoples that have different goals and different ways of doing that. Like there's a relationship between God and the Jewish people in one way, and between God and other peoples and other traditions in other ways. And it's not one doesn't have to necessarily be right and the other wrong. And yet you can still feel like, I think what many people said here going around was sort of there's an emotional bond to this is our way of relating to God and continuing that mission of making the world better. It doesn't have to be to the exclusion of. You can argue, some would say yes, one has to be right or the other wrong, but it's not impossible.
Yeah, it's not a right or wrong that I was bringing up or
Right.
anything like that.
Yeah. But I think the vision here, so then what happens then, so God's in the story of the Bible, right? On a very sort of bird's eye view. So God singles out Abraham, says your family is going to be a source of blessing to the world. Then, Jews go to Egypt, God takes them out, and he starts giving them all these laws. Some of these laws are ritual, a lot of them are ritual laws, are about called Shabbat, whatever, sacrifices, etc. And a lot of them are not. A lot of them are, we talked about torts or private law, damages, what happens, different types of charity, governing structures. A lot of them are the types of laws that now we don't associate with Judaism because Judaism doesn't, putting Israel to the side for the second, but Jewish law still doesn't govern. Like Jewish private law doesn't govern, it's not the tort law in Israel. But largely that's a lot of what the tradition was, and then the story and what the Bible is. And then the story ends, they're walking towards the land. If you think about it, they're walking through the desert towards Israel. And the story ends with Moses basically standing on a hill overlooking the land. The people who he sort of educated and led, etc., over the last 40 years are about to go in. He's not allowed to go in. And it ends on a cliffhanger. Like if you think about it that way, God says we're going to create this society that's supposed to be a holy people, a people that's a source of blessing, a model of justice, etc. They get to the edge, Moses is standing, they're about to go in, and the book ends, right? Like it's a cliffhanger. And then the book actually continues in an awful way. The book continues, if you pick up and read through prophets, so like the Bible is sort of much more inspiring. It ends, what's going to happen, there's this great mission. And the stories of the prophets are like stumble and fall and screw ups, and there's these inspiring speeches in the middle and moments of hope, but like it's largely the unsuccessful attempt to build this society. It's stories of failing kings and prophets railing against the unjustness of the society, and then it ends with exile. Like it ends with like the dispersion. And sort of the story ends in failure, right? And I don't want to, that's not like, it's kind of sad. And then, but the vision, the vision is can you create a society, the sort of mission that God gives in the Bible is, can you create a society that is a model of justice? And later Zionist philosophers, and maybe this, because of the time.
Sounds kind of Prussian to me.
Yeah, so
it's
we're
like
running out of
prophets
time,
like
so
a
we're not.
Prophet. Like it's not like a prophet.
No, the prophets were like prophets who spoke to God. So the main characters in the books of the prophets, right, are the kings and the prophets. There's the political leader, and the prophets are usually the critics of the political leadership. The prophets are criticizing the political leaders for being unjust, for etc. And they're sort of conveying, let's say, God's position within. Now, we're not going to read because we're out of time. I don't want to go. I'm going to go over by 2 or 3 minutes, but I'm not going to go over by much. So here is David Hazoni is just a contemporary Jewish thinker and writer, and he's summarizing thoughts of Eliezer Berkovitz. You can read these on your own. Eliezer Berkovitz was a 20th century Jewish philosopher and rabbi who was born in Germany. Before the war, he was actually a pulpit rabbi in Germany when Hitler came to power, escaped to London, was there during the Blitzkrieg, and ended up between America and Israel later. But he basically said the third Jewish Commonwealth that exists right now is he said actually no. We'll read one thing.
He would be in the third tier of stuff, which is more modern discussion post Talmud.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
He died in the 90s.
Right. Yeah.
So if we look at the second to last paragraph on the last page, because this is the one that sort of summarizes it most concisely, it says Berkovitz argues Judaism has always understood its central mission to be the creation of an exemplary community, and not just exemplary individuals. Not the education of holy individuals, but the existence of a holy people constitutes Judaism's central contribution to establishing morality in the world. The Jewish people is meant to be a people that embodies and exemplifies divine blessing, goodness, etc., in a way that models that to the world, not from a place of arrogance, right? There can be other models in the world. It doesn't have to be, but that sees its mission as modeling what a good and just and righteous society can be. And that's, if we started from the beginning of these sort of positions of like religion as a path towards individual perfection, here we have sort of a total opposite model of religion as a system trying to enable the construction of a society, of communities that embody justiceness, that be a source of inspiration for literally just making the world better. And you can get into Berkowitz's and other people's philosophy as to why the ritual is important in that. So you can argue, okay, give charity, be good, do good. Who cares about things like Shabbat or prayer or whatever? And that we can talk about another talk. Hopefully we'll talk about other weeks. But he has a whole philosophy as to why ritual and the discipline of ritual, the community creation that ritual does, is actually a central component of building a community that actually can embody these values.
At the time he was alive, he would have had data that the Jewish religion was probably like the biggest minority on the planet. That everyone talks about minorities and stuff, but like as far as usually as it relates to ethnicities, but who's more rare than total number of Jewish people on the planet? There's not many. What teeth do we? I mean, so if he's saying, how could he think that Judaism could do that if we are so low in numbers?
So the data I'd give in reverse, and again, in the last, I don't want to touch politics here.
Well, no,
people
no,
are very
this
people
was
are very
different.
aware of
This
Jews.
was not like
right. No, I'm saying
political,
right. No, I'm saying I'm going to respond in a way that can lead to politics, but I don't want to.
Okay.
I don't want to touch the actual politics.
Yeah, that wasn't
Jews
a
are very.
political question.
There is.
How do you feel about Russians? How do you feel about Jews?
Whether it's Israel or Jews in America or Jews in other places, people are aware of us much beyond our numbers. So I'd argue the data, like just the flip side of the data, is despite us being small, people are very aware of Jews.
Compare that to people.
So
in
what we do,
Fair.
how we act, so we definitely have a spotlight on us for, whether justified, not justified. It's not the only spotlight. People that care about other things. Everyone thinks everyone thinks they're like. I'm saying like we think we're more important than we are because everyone thinks everyone's world is egocentric. But Jews definitely punch above their weight in terms of people being aware of us. So that is the opportunity.
Right.
It's
but
not
it's
as
just
big as
our
we
impact,
think.
though. Like,
So the
how
impact
can the
is fine.
religion impact the world when there's?
But that's what he's arguing. You're arguing his point now.
I'm saying it's but here, by the way, here's a very easy counterpoint. Let's say is I think there's around 2 billion Christians in the world and 1 billion Muslims.
2
right?
billion Muslims.
2 billion Muslims.
Yeah.
So Christian
They're
plus
the
Muslims
most-
equals 4 billion.
They're the highest population, right?
So both of those emerged from Judaism,
Depends how you
right? They wouldn't they would, and that's not me like making a claim. They would acknowledge that. They then might have said they've superseded.
Yeah, it's in the.
But that in of itself is massive influence. I mean, our canonical texts are the origins of most people's religious traditions in the
When
world.
people talk about laws in the United States, it's Judeo-Christian.
So the impact on, like talk about, so you talk
I
about
don't
like
think enough people use that word actually. But.
the philosophies of, of Thomas Jefferson and John Locke and the political philosophers who defined American democracy. John Locke quotes scripture, quotes the Bible throughout his treatises on government. So
Because I was kind of wondering why you used the word Bible. Like, I grew up calling it the Torah.
I don't know. I've been using
is
all
the book I got when I was bar
The
mitzvah.
Christians would talk about the New Testament.
So I'm using.
Yeah, but they say they use the word Bible and New
To
Testament
supersede-
synonymously.
Yeah, so there's an argument exactly because there's an argument about the rejecting the mother religion. So I think it was I can't remember the names. I'm actually really bad at this part, but it's specifically to reject the mother religion to replace it. So they reuse the word as well.
So I was
But
using.
I mean, yeah, exactly. I think that kind of
Exactly.
we're simpatico in that like they use the word Bible to mean New Testament, and then there's the Old Testament too, which
And
comes
that
before.
doesn't even so
but
those
like
words in itself are loaded. Old Testament, New Testament, to like put it down.
But I want to pull back and conclude. I don't want if you guys want to keep talking.
because
after,
I was
want to
curious
conclude,
why you used the word Bible.
I'm
and
just
was like,
using. I'm just trying to use only English language and not assume. There's no. I could. There's no.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
There was no. intent other than just
Sorry,
speaking
no.
in English. Yeah. So that's, I mean, if people want to stick around and talk, I don't want to call it so that I don't like ending
Maybe
things
just
late.
one simple,
Yeah.
one quick question, simple answer maybe, and maybe not. Why does God pick Abraham?
So I can't answer that, but the read, there is a common read of the Bible that the Torah that I kind of laid out, that I started to lay out in those first chapters, and the reason I chose those verses is that there's an argument being made in the beginning of the Torah, and that God chooses sort of everyone initially. There's a universal choice, which is Adam and Eve as the fathers and mother of all. Fails, they wipe it out in the flood, start again. There's the Tower of Babel story, which we glossed over and didn't go into, but basically another attempt at universal religion. Fails, God then divides everyone up into different languages, spreads them out. Basically says one universal thing doesn't work because man tries to become too powerful. It's monolithic, it's fascism, it's whatever, right? It's trying to build, we need diversity, we need different peoples, we need different languages, spreads them out. And so that's the reason for, because otherwise man becomes too powerful when there's too much concentration of power. And then so when this universal approach doesn't work, create all these different traditions, and he picks one, or at least maybe he picks a whole bunch of ones. But in our tradition, he picks one and says, "Here is your job among the ones." But it's a separation of power. Because the universal approach fails. That's a read of the first 12 chapters of Bereshit, of Genesis. It's sort of a common, popular, modern read. Yeah, and that's an argument for the particularism with the universal goal. All right, I'm going to turn off the recording. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Is the recording going to be available for this
It is.
Yes.
I'm so sorry to talk over it.
Sorry? Oh, I think the video's only on me. I've never